Hey everybody, so welcome to this week's episode of Roto's Questions. So this week I'm going to talk about why I don't watch the news and why I don't trust media in general. So I hope anyone watching this episode actually, takes what I say to heart and starts to not just take everything the media and the people in the news say at face value and start to dig a little deeper and look for both sides of the story because there's always two sides of the story. There can even be three, four, five, six, 10 sides to the story, and we're always just being told one side. And it's like history. History is written by the victors of war, and so the news is written by the people that own the news. And the people that own the news are the same people that own the government, own the police, own the military, the same people that don't have our best interests at hand. So to me, how can we trust those people? How can we believe what they tell us? We can't. All right, so I'm going to start off by saying that the main reason I don't trust the news is because they're liars. They're liars. Whether they know they're lying or not doesn't really make a difference, because they're, they're liars and robots. And the reason I call them robots is because they just read off of the teleprompter. They just, whoever runs the show there is like, hey, read this, and they say yes. They're like, okay, I'll read this. They don't even ask questions. They just, like real reporting has just gone down the toilet a long time ago. You don't hear real stories anymore. These people don't even dress themselves. They have wardrobes all put out there for them. They have people do their makeup, and they have people telling them what to say. That's a robot to me. And when you're just repeating what people tell you without finding out the real story or finding out if it's true or not, you can't be trusted. And to me, like, the news should just be called propaganda and random stuff. Because really, when you only give one side of the story, it doesn't matter which side of the story you're giving, that's propaganda. You're not giving the full story. And the random stuff is because they throw in just a bunch of crap that, like, I sat down to watch the news, I don't know, last week sometime, because my mom likes to watch the 6 o'clock news, and sometimes I'll watch a few minutes with her just to see the kind of stuff that they have on there. And last week they were talking about cats on YouTube. Like, really? Like, if I want to watch cats on YouTube, I'll go on YouTube and look up cats. I don't think that should be on the news. I remember last year there was a cat that got lost at the international airport, and they talked about that for months. It's like, really? We're going to talk about a lost cat at the airport for months? I think I'm pretty sure there's, a few more important things going on than like a lost cat or some cute cats on YouTube. You know, so they talk more about cats and celebrities than actual news. You always hear about, oh, this celebrity's dating this person, or which celebrity went topless, or freaking whatever. That's not news. That's gossip. Or so when do you ever hear the news talking about free sustainable energy? Why aren't they talking about that? Tesla was working on that 100 years ago. You think we haven't made any progress in that field? But that's never on the news. When do they ever talk about the cures for disease? Like hemp oil or marijuana oil, or sodium bicarbonate, baking soda, and just all these cures for disease that are out there that are naturally based on plants and stuff instead of pharmaceuticals. When do they ever talk about that? How come? When do they ever talk about the whole banking fraud that's been put upon this country? Like, the Bank of Canada has the power to, like, print their own money, but they don't. Instead, they borrow it from the banks, and then instead the government borrows from the banks at interest, and that's why we're paying taxes. When do you ever hear the news talk about that? When do you ever hear the news talk about that the only way the government has power over us is if we give them consent? You don't ever hear about any of that. The main thing the news is there for is to keep us distracted and to keep us in fear. That's all you ever hear on the news, about murders and then terrorism, or oh, you're gonna catch this disease, like, you know, right now going on with the whole measles thing. Oh, you're gonna catch measles if you don't go get that vaccine. Or, you know, in the fall it's usually, oh, you're gonna get the flu if you don't go get the new flu vaccine, and blah blah blah. They're always trying to keep us in fear of what's coming next. Why? It's just to keep us distracted from what's really going on, like a couple of things I just mentioned. You know, when do you ever hear the media talk about the Freemasons? You know, and if you don't know who the Freemasons are, look them up, because I guarantee you they have their hands in everything in this city and the country and the world. You know, including, you know, police headquarters, you know, city hall, the Alberta legislature and parliament, and beyond. Why isn't the news ever talking about them? You know, why? Another big thing that's been going on lately too is with all these shootings recently, you know, whether it be mall shootings, you know, people killing cops, or school shootings, which is the big one. You know, how come the news never talks about the prescription drugs that most of these shooters have been on? And which is could be one of the reasons that led them to act out in such a crazy way, I guess. You know, why don't the news talk about that? Because these drugs are doing this to a lot of people. You know, why don't the schools talk about, or schools, sorry, why doesn't the media talk about, you know, the U.S. government ties to the Bin Laden family? I mean, Bin Laden got his rise to power from the CIA, and there's pictures to prove this. More than just pictures, there's files and everything. If people would just look that up, but you know, that wasn't mentioned on 9/11. Why not? You know, why doesn't the news talk about pedophiles in our government? You know, yeah, and that's a pretty outlandish claim, but the proof is there. All you gotta do is look it up. Even some of Harper's friends, pedophiles. Why doesn't the news talk about all the FBI ties to terrorism? I mean, you always hear about the FBI foiled this terrorist plot, and the FBI did this to stop terrorism and blah, blah, blah. What they don't mention is that the FBI is the one that gave these guys the explosives. The FBI is the ones that gave these guys the plan. And that's how the FBI knew where and when they were going to try and strike, because they set up the whole thing. The FBI always goes and, you know, they find, like, say some guy that, you know, he doesn't like the government and whatever. He's got some views, and then all of a sudden they turn him and they're like, yeah, hey, we're connected to, say, Al Qaeda, and we'll give you this and this if you do this and this. And then all of a sudden the kids, like, they convince them, like, okay, yeah, like, let's do it. And then all of a sudden, boom, arrested. We just foiled a terrorist plot. Like, come on, really? Seriously? You foiled your own terrorist plot, and now this kid that just, you know, had some views that against the government, now his kid's going to be in jail for life because they convinced him to become a terrorist. You know, so why don't the news talk about that? Why doesn't the news talk about the FBI assassinations on its own people? I mean, just a few years ago, or maybe more than a few years ago now, but Martin Luther King's family won a civil case in court that proved the FBI was behind his assassination. Why wasn't that on the news? That's pretty big news that FBI killed Martin Luther King. You think that'd be like all over 6 o'clock news, front page story, but nope, nothing. You know, and I already kind of mentioned 9/11, but, you know, even if you watch some of the BBC news coverage from 9/11, you'll see that there's a news reporter reporting that World Trade Center 7 has collapsed or whatever, and the World Trade Center 7 is in the shot behind the news reporter. It hasn't even collapsed yet. Where did she get that information from? Who told her that? You know, it's pretty crazy. And then also, you know, there's in the news, sometimes the news make mistakes. And I call it mistakes because the people that own them will call it a mistake after and be like, you guys shouldn't have done that. And just to paint an example, you know, they mention certain incidents when they're reporting live on the day of, but then you'll never hear about it again afterwards. So take just 9/11 for example. If you go on YouTube and look up just witness accounts of 9/11, you'll hear, you know, firefighters or policemen or even the last person that got out of the 9/11 before it collapsed, which was, I believe his name is William Rodriguez. If you YouTube him, they all talk about, you know, bombs going off in the World Trade Center. There's tons of videos of people talking about this. And it was mentioned on the news on that day because they were reporting live and they didn't know they weren't supposed to talk about that. Never ever mentioned again on the news again in what's been 13 years now. Never ever again mentioned. On 9/11 too, you know, there was Israelis that were arrested on the George Washington Bridge in a van full of explosives. Mentioned once that day on 9/11. Never heard about it again. You know, same, let's take Sandy Hook, for example, too, you know. There's multiple shooters. There's video of multiple shooters. It wasn't just that, what was his name? Michael Lanza, I think was the guy. It wasn't just him, if it was even him, but there was multiple shooters outside, mentioned live on the news that day, never ever again talked about. Why? You know, this is crazy for these people to lie to us. I mean, these people are supposed to be the ones that are telling us what's going on and giving us the truth, and instead they're just propaganda and random stuff. You know, so let's see what else. Okay, for another example, they only, like I said, they only paint one side of the story, especially when talking about like revolutions or, you know, citizen uprisings. And let's just take the Ukraine, for example. I mean, the government in Ukraine was a democratically elected government. What's wrong with that? Nothing. The Americans and the CIA came in and helped overthrow this government, and now they recognize the new government that came to power illegally as legitimate. Does anyone else see a problem with that? And then now when the citizens fight back and they're like, we don't want this government, it's an illegal government, and they ask Russia for help, all of a sudden they're terrorists. Terrorists, and they're all bad. Russia's bad for wanting to help. You know, there's a problem there. This government was democratically elected, and the Americans helped overthrow it, and then they call the people fighting back as terrorists? I mean, it's just crazy. And then what's even worse is Canada is supporting America doing this. You know, our tax dollars are supporting these kinds of crimes against democratically elected governments. Why isn't our government or our news talking about that? You know, especially when America does the same thing to hundreds of countries around the world. But yeah, you know, Russia's the bad guy. They can't do that. They can't help anybody. But, you know, America will just go and bomb anyone they want, and we'll support them every day. The news will never talk about that. All right, so, and then a couple other things I just want to mention that the news doesn't talk about. You know, why doesn't the news in Canada ever talk about, you know, the genocide that was committed against the First Nations people by the Catholic Church? I think that's pretty big news. And I'm not talking about the genocide against the First Nations people when, you know, people from Europe and stuff first came over here hundreds of years ago. This happened in the 20th century. You know, lots of kids were raped and abused and even killed by the Catholic Church. You know, and even I believe Harper admitted this last year. Was anyone arrested? Why wasn't this on the news all the time? Like, this is front page stuff. I mean, you know, what about, you know, Canada selling weapons to Pakistan, Iraq, Mexico, etc. You know, countries that they claim are terrorist countries, or in Mexico's case is, you know, the cartels and all the drug violence down there with, you know, and eventually those drugs make their way up to Canada. You know, this just shows that Canada, as well as the Americans, are making money off both sides. They're selling weapons to these people, and then they go in and bomb these people. It's crazy. Why isn't this talked about on the news? You know, why isn't the government spying on its citizens talked about in the news? You know, there's I can't remember what report it was. I was just reading about it yesterday that shows that anyone that has ever protested or involved in anything like Occupy or any of those kind of movements are being spied on by the government. Why isn't this on the news? And then just one last thing I want to mention too is the Freedom of Information Act. You know, I've heard a few things about this recently in the news, but my big thing is, why is there even a Freedom of Information Act in the first place? I mean, shouldn't we have access to all information no matter what? I mean, doesn't the government work for us? We should be the ones, they should be asking us for permission for information or something to, you know, why do we have to ask for permission from our employees, which is what the government is? You know, that'd be like you walking into work and telling your boss, yeah, you need my permission to go home. That's pretty much what it's like, this Freedom of Information Act. Anything we want from the government, they should give it to us. We work for them. It's crazy. But, you know, that's never mentioned in the news. You know, so it's just my goal with this video for you guys is just for you guys to start forming your own opinions. You know, watch the news if you want. I mean, I don't really, because it's just really just one-sided propaganda. But if you're gonna watch the news, you know, watch it with a keen eye. Watch what they're like, listen to what they're saying, and go and look for the other side of the story. Like I said, there's always so many sides of the story. Just go and listen, and just form your own opinion. So I just want to end with one of my favorite quotes by a man named William Cooper. You know, so it's listen to everybody, read everything, but don't believe anything unless you can back it up with your own research. And William Cooper, he used to work for, you know, the intelligence service in America until he started his own radio show and stuff, kind of exposing what they're up to. He predicted 9/11, I don't know, like 2-3 months before it happened, and then he was gunned down in front of his house 2 months after 9/11. Again, that wasn't on the news. So yeah, do your own research, form your own opinions, and please just think for yourself and don't believe everything you hear at face value, even what I'm telling you. Go look it up for yourself. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.